So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, broadcast and recorded live on blogtalkradio.com from the new Media and American League Baseball capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. Bob Delaney has lived not one, but two enviable and intimidating lives. Is that proper English? Dave, you can tell me later. And he's nowhere near done yet. In his first career, Delaney was a New Jersey State trooper who went undercover for 3 years to infiltrate the mob in the Garden State. My home state, I might point out. Forget Tony Soprano. This was the real thing. He traded in his given surname, Delaney, to become Bobby Covert, a crooked trucking executive. Now, as Covert, Delaney gathered enough evidence in the mid-'70s to convict 30 members of the Genovese and Bruno crime families. When that assignment ended, it took Delaney a while to leave his assumed identity and personality behind as he dealt with a form of post-traumatic disorder. One of the ways he accomplished it was refereeing basketball games, of all things. Now, like everything he's tried, Delaney stood out as a ref. He moved up from one league to the next, soon catching the eye of an NBA official. Jersey Shore League games led to the old Continental Basketball League, and pretty soon Delaney retired from the New Jersey State Troopers to be a full-time NBA referee. Now, last year, Delaney published a book about his exploits in both Gangland and the Land of the Giants. That book, Covert, written with my good friend and award-winning St. Petersburg Times sports writer Dave Schreiber, was just published in paperback. Now, before I bring on my guests, here's Bob Delaney describing his book.
1975, I was a New Jersey State trooper who went undercover and infiltrated the mob. I became Bobby Covert. Stolen loads, buying guns, loan sharking. When I was undercover, I had a costume. That costume was Bobby Covert. My morality changed. To me, bad guys were putting bullets in people's heads. Bad guy wasn't somebody who was stealing. That was just a guy that was putting bread on his table. I learned the street. I learned about what it was like to be a wise guy who was a threat on my life. When you hear it and you think that somebody in this world is targeting you, it eats at you. And it stays with me to this day. When I surfaced from working undercover, I was working a summer pro league, and someone saw me working the ball game, asked if I was interested in the NBA. I wanted to see some things that were good in society. The bad guys would win if I stopped living my life. Here's my story.
All right. Technical difficulties behind us, I hope. Bob Delaney, Dave Schreiber, welcome to Mr. Media.
How are you? It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to be here, Bob. Hey, Bob, Dave, good to have you. Hey, guys, congratulations on the success of the book, first of all.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And I understand that there are serious movement towards a possible movie.
Yeah, we've signed a film rights deal with Appledown Films and Scott Burns Productions. Yeah, there's a script in the process of being written right now.
Bob, will they have to get two guys to play you? One during the Wise Guy years and one during the NBA years?
You know, I spoke to Ray Liotta. Ray did the voiceover on the ESPN piece that was done on me a few years ago, and I've had him to ball games. And as you said, Bob, you're a Jersey guy, and he's a Jersey boy as well. But he made the comment that he could play me old, he can't play me young. So, you know, all this happened when I was back in my early 20s. So they're going to have an actor that is a younger fellow that they can make look older as time goes on in the story.
Well, I could do it backwards, you know, kind of Benjamin Button-like.
Yeah.
So, Bob, your history as a trooper was sort of an open secret by the time you got to the NBA. You talked in the book about how, Carl
Malone.
Help me.
Carl
Malone, the mailman.
Yeah.
Carl Malone, the mailman,
yes.
had made a reference to it. But has putting your story in black and white, in text, in a book that, you know, thousands of people can hold in their hand, has that changed your life? as a result?
Yeah, I think it's brought more awareness. Obviously, I mean that's an obvious statement. And you know, the NBA is a small group, and we kind of know each other's life stories, and the word gets around pretty quick. So when I came into the league, they knew that I was a state trooper. I don't think many people had a true understanding of the deep undercover operation that I was involved with. And Darryl Garrettson did a very good job. He was the supervisor officials, director of officials at the time. He wanted my reputation to be developed as a referee, not as the guy that came into the NBA that happened to be an undercover cop and a New Jersey State Trooper. So not many stories were written. It wasn't until Jackie McMullen from the Boston Globe wrote a large piece on it in her paper around the year 2000, maybe 99, that it became more known. And then from there, ESPN did pieces, HBO, Real Sports, and it continued to grow. And there were more and more requests for interviews to the NBA. And there was, it got to where, we were getting interview requests quite often. So I had always been asked to write a book. Right after I surfaced from doing Undercover in 1978, I was approached to do a book, and I didn't feel the time was right. You know, I was a state trooper that was going to be testifying in court cases. I didn't think it was time to tell the story, and I'm glad that I waited because there are so many layers to the story, much more than the undercover phase. And I know it's a Soprano-esque type story, and there's an intrigue to that. But I think the more important part is what takes place after the undercover phase. And, we'll talk about that as we go on. But one of the things that happened was Dave Schreiber wrote a piece in the St. Pete Times, a two-part piece that gained quite a bit of recognition around the country. And I knew when I was sitting doing work with Dave that if I was going to do the book, it was going to be with him, because my wife says it best. Dave tells my story, not his version of it. And, when we started working together, I shared with Dave that I would have to ask him to take all of his professional skills and all of his formal training and put it to the side, because I'm from New Jersey. I don't speak correct English. And if we're going to say this correctly, we're going to have to chop my words and talk in phrases and put emphasis on some certain words when we're doing it. And I tell people, Joe Pistone's a good friend of mine, Donnie Brasco, and when I went into the theater and I saw what Johnny Depp did in the role as Donnie Brasco, he told Joe Pistone's story, and I say the same thing about Dave Schreiber. Dave Schreiber told my story, and in a way that we get accolades. I was on a show last night, and a person called in, a young fella, and he told me that he read the book 3 times, that he was that interested in it, and that it was such a great read that he's read it 3 times. So the host of that show said he had never had anyone call in and say they read a book 3 times before calling in. So it's a tribute. Dave and I did a lot of work, and we went back to New Jersey and went back to the undercover haunts and back to my neighborhoods, and he was able to get the flavor of what this story is about.
That helped an awful lot, actually. I was going to just jump in there, Bob, and say,
go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, as far as going with Bob to Patterson, going to the old ports in Newark and Elizabeth, Bayonne, it was so valuable to me as a writer. It opened my eyes to what it looked like, what it felt like, and Bob was there showing me every step of the way. And I actually took a movie camera, and I don't do this very often, but that was a big help to me, because when I came back home, I could look at it, I could relive it, and see all the texture of it. That was a big early step in the process.
I was going to jump in and just say that there's a line in the new Eddie Murphy movie called Imagine That, where Martin Sheen, who plays his boss, they meet actually for the first time, and they're in the finance business, and Murphy's telling him, "Oh, I read your book 3 times. I read it 3 times." And Martin Sheen stops him dead and says, "What was so difficult to understand that you couldn't get it the first time?" So,
I'm glad I didn't say that to the young lad last night.
It's going to be in your head now the next time.
Exactly. You put something in my head. I hope I don't come out with those words.
Dave, what was it about Bob's story that, and you and I have known each other for 20 plus years, maybe 25 years now. What was it about Bob's story that made it tellable in this form. And I want to point out that I think, Dave, you wrote a story many years ago about a baseball umpire who had a second line of work. I think that he sold duffel bags. Now, why is that so much less interesting than this guy who was, New Jersey State Trooper?
Gee, I can hardly remember the other story you're talking about. But I'll tell you one thing about this story that goes beyond a lot of the action in it, which is the message that underlies all of it. And to me, I immediately recognize this as a story about the power of the human spirit, because it's not just the courage it took for Bob to go undercover and risk his life every day for 3 years wearing a wire amid the mob, but it was the courage it took when he resurfaced and his life was in turmoil to get some psychological counseling from a former professor of his in college, face some of the problems he was dealing with, and really put his life back together. That's something that takes true courage, and I thought, that's an important message. No matter what walk of life you're in, people face problems. It's how you deal with the problems that can make you stronger. And I said, this underlies the book, and something I wanted to help be part of.
Is that what people find so compelling about Bob? I mean, he seems in a lot of ways kind of larger than life, and he's a guy who's done the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think when people meet Bob, I mean, he's got tremendous charisma, but they also respect what he's done. He's risen to the top of several professions that it's hard enough to rise to the top of one, but he's done it in law enforcement, he's done it in the NBA, and he's done it now as a guy who goes all over the country educating people in law enforcement, people who put their lives on the line, and helping them deal with the problems that are similar in a lot of ways to what he faced.
Bob, tell us a little about a typical day in the life of Bobby Covert.
Yeah, the day in the life of Bobby Covert was really in the early stages of it. And just to back up so that your listeners know, Bobby Covert is not a name that we dreamed up and wanted to be cute and use a funny undercover name. People ask me, was Johnny undercover name taken because Bobby Covert just as close. We took on the identity of a child that died at birth. Robert Allen Covert was died at birth, and he was in the same age grouping as I was. So we had the same first name, same ethnic-sounding last name, same age grouping. And by having that birth certificate, I could then develop this new persona as Bobby Covert, taking everything that was part of my life. I'm an Irish kid that grew up in an Italian neighborhood in Paterson, New Jersey, and I know what that's like. So for me to try to be something else is going to be false. I have to be who I am. So we adopt those things that took place in my life as Bob Delaney and adapt it to the persona of Bobby Covert. Now, when we start the trucking company, the first trucking company we start is Mid-Atlantic Air Sea Transportation in Elizabeth, New Jersey. There's 3 FBI agents and 2 state troopers, me being one of them. We're made to look as though we're 5 co-owners of this trucking company. Every cop will tell you that you get lucky in an investigation that's successful. We got lucky. A guy by the name of Pat Kelly was a consigliere with the DiNorzio crew of the Bruno crime family, was jammed up. He was going to jail. The FBI and the state police in New Jersey had cases against him, and he had a choice to make. He was either going to become an informant or go away. He chose to become an informant. He came to work with us. We started a larger trucking company in the shadows of the Statue of Liberty in Jersey City, New Jersey, called Alamo Transportation. And I was made to look as though I was the president of that company. Pat Kelly was the vice president. The other law enforcement members played different roles, either as my bodyguard, driver, or as accountants or terminal managers of the trucking company. What took place during that first trucking company was the learning process. It was like we were in the minor leagues. And then we got to the major leagues when we went to Alamo Transportation, because we got 2 partners in that trucking company, and they were the Genovese and Bruno crime families. And we were kicking back 25%, 12.5% to each family to provide labor peace, to provide contracts on the port, to make us house trucker of mob-controlled companies, as well as making sure that our trucks were not hijacked.
Were you ever concerned? Pat Kelly's a fascinating character in the book. Were you ever concerned, though, that he might be, as they used to say in the World War II movies, a double agent, that maybe he was telling you what you needed to know, but he was informing on you behind your back?
Bob, I thought that every minute of every day and every part of my actions at the time that I was undercover. I never allowed that thought. I never gave full trust to him at the time that we were doing the undercover job. However, we'll get to it, but later in life there was a reunion that took place that helped mend those bridges.
Right. In fact, I was paging back through that today, and you encounter him when you're working as an NBA ref much later in life, and get back together with him. But then even more touching is later you get word that he's passed, and his wife at the time had no idea who he was until he died, and found some clips in the attic. Yeah, it was a great, well told story.
In fact, that part of the story is, it underlines the history of this country, because Pat Kelly, after we completed the investigation, was put into the witness relocation program. He testified in court cases. We convicted 30-plus members of organized crime. That landmark investigation is used to this day to help undercover agents, undercover operatives, and their supervisors understand how an undercover operation can be run, as well as understanding traditional organized crime. So it was an amazing investigation when you look back at it. And Pat Kelly was able to go into the relocation program and be a successful person once he left, because of the vision that Bobby Kennedy had. Bobby Kennedy started that witness relocation program. So the world that Pat Kelly was part of, and that I then, as you referred to, in 1999, I'm working a ball game in Phoenix, Arizona, and some guys yelling at me from the sidelines, which is not unusual as an NBA referee for people to yell at us. But he said something that had a little bit more attention-getting words for me. He said, Bobby, and I wasn't paying attention, and all of a sudden he yelled Alamo Trucking. Well, all of a sudden I knew somebody on the sideline had a lot more information than the average person. And I looked over. I couldn't recognize who it was, and he mouthed to me, "It's Pat." He looked so much different, so much more refreshed, not as heavy, not as stressed. So we were able to reconnect that night and stayed in touch until, as you said, he passed away from a heart attack. What's interesting, I've heard from his family, and if I could, Bob, I'd like to share something with you that's in the paperback version that comes out this week. It's a note I got from one of Pat Kelly's granddaughters. Her father was 16 years old at the time that Pat Kelly, her grandfather, was relocated. And she sent the note to me, and in that note she said, I knew Patrick John Kelly by a different name. I knew him as Pop. I knew him as a successful businessman, an avid sports fan, a devout Catholic, a loving father, and my amazing grandfather. I also was aware that there was a part of him I would never know. For years after his unexpected death, I wondered if I would ever learn of the chapter of his life he tried so hard to keep from us. I often prayed that we would find a journal or the beginnings of a book he had been writing. And then she goes on to say that she read Covert and how helpful it was for her to understand. But then one of her closing lines was, in speaking to me, "I am sure that you are well aware of the lives your work saved by infiltrating the New Jersey Mafia, but I want to be sure you are aware of the lives your work helped to create." I share that every time I speak with law enforcement officers, firefighters, emergency services. I never heard the essence of law enforcement described in the way that young woman described it to me. We all know in the law enforcement paramilitary world that we save lives. That's part of what we do and what law enforcement does. But I never thought about it as creating lives. And she went on to speak about the lives that were created and her cousins that are all now either in the military or are working in communities, that are teachers, that are lawyers. And she said that had this not happened, my father probably would have followed in his father's footsteps and still been part of the Jersey mob, and I would have grown up in that atmosphere. And yet I have been given an opportunity in life, and our lives were created to what they are today. And I share that, as I said, with law enforcement. I'm going to share that same message with soldiers in Iraq and Germany when I go there this summer on a visit to the troops, to share with them this message about the story of Covert, but really the the larger layer of the story, as Dave said, was about the post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's more of a life story. And I truly believe that there are many people that can relate to this story because there are so many people that have lived this kind of life. And it doesn't mean that you have to go undercover against the mob to have lived this life. We all go through tough times, and as Dave said, the human spirit is amazing at what can happen and how it can come back to full circle to be a fruitful and a life that can mean something in our society.
I want to, Bob, I want to ask you, you mentioned when we first started talking about, you mentioned Joe Pistone, who went undercover as Donnie Brasco, and I know there was at one point where you're both undercover and you actually crossed paths, although I don't think you knew it at the time. How different and how similar were what you did and your experiences subsequently?
Yeah, our roles were different. Joe, we did cross paths because we would sit down and talk about different places that we were in, different restaurants, different situations, and we knew that we were in the same, walking the same paths. And in fact, there was a third undercover agent that we both knew and had been out with him on different occasions. So we knew we crossed paths, but I became closer to Joe after Joe surfaced, and I was still going through some difficult times. Louis Freeh, who was the director of the FBI, was a street agent at the time. And Joe was very helpful in me understanding what I was going through. He said to me, Bobby, you're living your life, you got one foot in both lives. You still got one foot in Bobby Covert's life, and you got one in Bobby Delaney's life. You got to get both feet over to Bobby Delaney because that's who you are. And you don't like who Bob Covert was. You don't like the fact that he got close to people and told on them. And you feel like you are infringing on your personal relationship and that you then lock these guys up. I tell the story, if you freeze frame and go back to 5th grade at St. Mary's Grammar School in Paterson, New Jersey, I was taught by the Good Sisters of St. Dominic, and I got caught doing something in the classroom, and Sister told me I was going to be punished. And before she gave me my punishment, I said, Sister, Jimmy DeLell is doing it too. I gave up my best friend in a heartbeat, and she cracked me. And, the ring that they say they're married to God that they wear, I think that's there to put welts on your head, because she hit me in the head, and she said, Delaney, you don't tell on your friends. I was taught by the Good Sisters of St. Dominic not to tell on my friends. The unwritten rule on the playground is you don't tell on your friends. And yet, as an undercover agent, what I was asked to do is become friends with people and tell on them. That took an emotional toll on me, as well as going through the emotional roller coaster of living through that fear on a daily basis. Wearing a wire, you're afraid that you're going to get caught with that wire. You're going to be thought of as an informant, and in that world, informants die. I was good at doing undercover work. Everybody is. Everybody's got something they're good at, and I would have the meetings with the wise guys and pull down the street maybe 2 miles and have to stop the car and get out and throw my guts up, or find the first gas station I could find because I had diarrhea. I wasn't sharing that with anybody. Those were fears that I had inside of me that I was repressing, and when we repress emotions to the point that we don't allow them out at all, at some point they're going to come out, and it takes a toll. And to get back to your question, I know I got off on a roll there, but okay. Joe Pistone's job was, Joe was on his own, and he was an undercover agent that was working a job by himself. I had other undercover agents and another trooper that was with me, so there's the difference there. Also, I'm an Irish guy that got a lot of money, and working in an undercover capacity. Let's not confuse that. I didn't have a lot of money as Bob Delaney. I had a lot of money as Bobby Covert because the government was behind me. So I was what they call an earner and an associate of organized crime. Joe Pistone was a member of organized crime and had the potential to be a made member. The only time a law enforcement officer would have been made because of his Italian heritage and the rules that are made up for who becomes an inducted made member. So the FBI stopped it before it got to that point, but Joe would have been a made guy.
Now, Dave, I haven't forgotten that you're there.
That's fine. This is very interesting.
Were there any aspects of Bob's story that gave you pause, that made you go, could that be true?
No, and I'm glad you brought that up because sometimes people say, could that have happened? Well, let me say one thing. In writing this, one of the things that was tremendously valuable to both of us was that Bob kept meticulous daily records from his trooper life, kept the folders, and when we got around to writing this, it was just a vast amount of documented things from every day of his life undercover. And again, when he was testifying before the United States Senate about the corruption that he helped put an end to, there were tremendous amounts of on-the-record documents, and because Bob had such an attention to detail and kept such meticulous records, this gave us just tremendous material to bring the story to life.
Well, one of the things, Bob, you talk about early in the book when you're getting involved with organized crime as Bobby Covert. I want to clarify that. But you talk about all the whoring that's going on. All the guys are cheating on their wives. They're going with this one. They're going with that one. Somehow you were immune to that. Didn't that make you stand out in a negative way, that you weren't chasing skirts and doing all that kind of stuff?
You know, in an undercover capacity, you have to have answers ready for those kinds of situations. I had people that wanted to introduce me to their cousins and daughters, and they also saw this guy that had a lot of bread and was the president of a trucking company, so and a young guy, so I was being introduced around. What I always said was that I had a girl in New York that I was close with, and that's who I'm with, and I don't play. And that was I would just say it like that. I don't play. And there's this misconception that everybody's got to be running around and carousing. I know of undercover agents that just don't drink when they're undercover, and they just say, I don't drink. I'm here to make money, and I don't want to have my head fuzzy. So if you have answers in place, the same thing with undercover agents that are working strictly in the drug world. They can't do drugs. I mean, it's not allowed. It's against the law. So they got to have an answer. And more often than not, it's, hey, I make my money at this. I don't play with this. And you got to stand firm and have a believable demeanor about you. One of the things that you learn very early on, and that I stress to undercover agents as I speak to them around the country and Europe, is at some point in time, you are going to be up on the stand, and you are going to be testifying. And if you have any of these kinds of things that take place that are potential landmines in your investigation, because you decided in a moment of weakness to get involved with somebody's girlfriend or daughter, or put yourself in a compromising position, that you have to remember this is a job and it's your profession, and you must be in a professional mode at all times, even though you're play acting. And I will tell you, it's not easy. It is not easy. It's you float into that role. I often say that was not a role. That's who I was for a long period of time.
And Bob, what was your worst day being undercover like?
Well, my worst day was probably the day I thought was going to be my best day, and that was the day that the operation ended. I thought this was going to be a tremendous day. I was going to finally come back to the state police, and they were going to know that I wasn't thrown out of the state police, or that I didn't have all the rumors that were going around when I left. And I'd be able to be back to who I was, Bob Delaney. Yet that day on that armory, at the end of the investigation, they started bringing the defendants in early morning hours, which is common for a raid. Troopers muster up around 2 or 3 in the morning, go out. We had 2 uniformed troopers, an FBI agent and a state police detective, go pick up the defendants. As they were bringing into West Orange Armory, they were being fingerprinted and photographed and being moved into rooms to be interviewed and trying to find the next informant. And Barry Lardier was with me, and we were standing upstairs. He was a sergeant in the state police. He was in plain clothes, a detective, and he had his credentials on the outside of his jacket, as you see many times with detectives in those kinds of situations. I didn't have any of my credentials back. I didn't have my uniform back then yet, and so I was in plain clothes. And Barry said, you want to go downstairs? And I knew this would be the first time that these guys are going to know that I'm a state trooper. And I guess subconsciously I put my arms behind my back in a military parade rest pose, and Barry standing next to me, and a guy named Ronnie Sardella was being fingerprinted. He turned around, looked at me, and he said, "Bobby, what they pinch you for?" And before I could answer, Barry said, "Pinch, he's with us. He's a trooper." And I dropped my hands. He obviously thought I was handcuffed, and I dropped my hands, and he looked at me, and the look that went between us was not one of anger. It was more of one of disappointment. He looked at me and said, "Bobby, how can you do this to us? How can you do it to me? I'm your friend." I could probably tell you what everybody had on their feet the rest of the day because I couldn't pick my head up. The depression level started then, the feeling of isolation, of who am I a part of? I had been so far removed from the state police, I didn't feel that I was part of the state police. I was so far removed, and now was away from the people who I did hang out with, were the wise guys and the criminals that I'm now arresting. I'm no longer part of them. The isolation was tremendous. A tremendous amount of paranoia came in, thinking that they're going to come after me. They're going to do me physical harm. And then shortly after, we got a word that there was a death threat on me. So all of those kinds of emotions going on. What I thought was going to be the greatest day ended up being the worst, and it got worse from there as time went on for quite a few months and years afterwards.
And I'm going to let people find that detail in the book. But what I want to do now is transition a bit and talk about life in the NBA. And just to contrast, when I asked you about your worst day as Bobby Covert, what is a really bad day in the NBA like by comparison?
Well, a bad day in the NBA is nowhere near anything like that. I'll tell you, a bad day may be a couple of delayed flights or canceled flights trying to get from one town to the next, and those are the kinds of bad things. I don't have bad days in the NBA, to be honest with you. I have a great life to be part of one of the greatest pro sports leagues in the world, to be around the greatest athletes in the world, to be on that floor and be part of that competition is something special. I would never feel sorry for an NBA referee. They have a great life.
All right. Well, now I've got a piece of audio that I'd like to play for everybody that is from a day in the NBA that I think maybe is a little bit worse than missing a flight. And this maybe you tell me if this is a day you'd like to forget. Listen to this, folks.
Fisher pulled Monte Ellis down. This is awful. Bob Delaney got completely fooled on this play.
Are they calling this an offensive foul?
Derek Fisher grabbed the back of Monte Ellis and tackled him and pulled him on top of him. This is atrocious. This is as big a missed call as you're ever going to see.
Getting tangled up.
Fisher there grabs him and pulls him down.
There it is.
Well, I had a perfect angle on that. And this
costs the game.
This is just wrong. It's not even basketball.
I'm sure. Hey, Bob, you probably got about 100 of those. I mean, there's no way there's just one of those around. I mean, yeah, we miss calls. I'll be the first to admit, and every NBA referee will. Yeah, we've missed calls, and just because an announcer says that we missed a call doesn't necessarily mean that's true. So I'd have to see the play and look at it. But I will tell you this: I have never, ever missed a call from my couch. I get them all right from the couch. On the floor, while the game's going on, they're a little bit difficult at times, but when you do miss a call, and you do miss a call at the a crucial part of the game, which you don't want to miss a call at any time, but if you miss it at the end of a game, those are tough days. I mean, you're up half the night, and I've had my share of those. They happen. They happen to every referee that's ever worked any sport, and it's just part of what it is. And you get back on the horse, and you go to the next game, and you try to be better. And those kinds of plays, are described well by the announcer. Whether it's right or not, we'd have to sit down and really break the tape down. But I agree. We do miss them, but more often than not, we get them right.
Well, I want to let everybody know that was a call from a televised game. It was the Lakers and the Warriors back in March 2008. Is there a postmortem that goes on after after any game, but particularly after a game where there's a call right at the end like that? Or
every game we go back and do the videotape of the game. After every game, we watch a tremendous amount of tape, and we send a report in that documents good call, bad call, correct, incorrect, non-call incorrect, non-call correct, position on the floor. So what it does for an official is reinforces what we're doing right, as well as immediately show us what we're doing wrong, because we live in a negative world. Everyone is telling us we're doing something wrong, the players, the fans, and on the same play, the exact same play, two different coaches, two different teams are telling you that you're wrong. Well, something's got to be right there. And so what we want to do is get in an objective position to watch the tape. And many times when we watch tape, we turn the sound off. That way you don't have that influence of what people think they saw. You just look at the tape as objectively as possible. And, you become very honest with yourself, because tape, I shouldn't say tape never lies, but tape, as long as you're getting the right angle of the play, will tell you what's taking place on that floor. And you can try and justify it in your mind, but the reality of it's right in front of you as you look at the video. So the more that we do that kind of work, the better we get, and we do it every night. We're watching tape before ball games and after ball games and send the reports in. It's a lot more than just getting on the court and refereeing the ball game. There's a lot more hours involved in the profession that I'm in.
Now I'm thinking you're only human, and Dave, you jump in here and disagree or agree here, but a referee, an umpire, what have you, you're only human, and obviously you make mistakes, but you really don't want to be called out by name by the Marv Alberts of the world on something like that. I'm assuming that's something you don't like to have happen every day.
Well, they know my name. What my name is not. I can't do anything about that. So I don't mind that people know who I am. People always say that the greatest referees, umpires are the ones you don't know their name. I don't agree with that statement, because if you're doing a good job, they better know your name so they call you back to come back to work. I mean, people know who we are, and and when you're in this kind of work, you got to accept that you're going to be criticized. And I always say, listen to the critical words, and I say this to young people when I'm speaking to them at basketball camps or youth leadership groups. Listen to who is giving you the criticism. If it's someone who is being objective and someone who is being honest in their thoughts, then you want to listen to that person. Many times an announcer is cheerleading for the team that he's a part of. So he's got a interest in who wins or loses. I want to hear from the person who cares who wins or loses. They give you an objective opinion. The people that are cheerleading on the sideline that happen to jump in and make comments, there's a little bit of a something that's not that open and objective in their criticism.
Yeah, I think Bob said it best there, and I would say also in the book, Bob does talk about this a little bit, and one thing he talks about is how the late Darrell Garretson, director of officials back then, was really good at working with refs who maybe were hard on themselves. Maybe they thought they'd blown a call, and he would get them to get back on the horse. You put it in the past, and you move forward. It's just part of the game. It's part of the territory.
Dave, what was the difference in writing the part of the book that's about Bobby Covert, the undercover trooper, and then the part of the book that's about Bob Delaney, the NBA official? It's almost like the schizophrenia in a sense, both for Bob, but also probably for you, because it's a different voice, isn't it?
Not really. I felt, and I think the link between the two lives, the two worlds, were so strong. Bob needed a place where he could find peace and solace after this really dark period that he lived through. And the transition from that world to going back to the courts where he had played basketball and done some refereeing, and this gave him a sense of peace. I just thought it was a natural flow from one world to the next, and to me it was just a seamless flow. One thing I'll add is that this process that we went through writing it together, Bob's attention to detail, again, amazing. We would do read-throughs on these chapters to make sure we had everything right, from the voice to individual words. And we often would read chapters back and forth over the phone 6-7 times till it was right. And I think that really helped as well.
Bob, you've been around real gangsters. How do the wannabe gangstas, the AS, in the NBA compare?
Oh, I don't. I mean, I wouldn't even refer to anybody as a gangster in the league. You know, the people that I was around were real mobsters. Because someone dresses a certain way or acts a certain way, I wouldn't qualify that. I wouldn't make that kind of statement.
Okay, I was just curious. And do you have much interaction off the court with the players and the coaches?
Not really. No, not really. If we're involved with them at times, it's with charity work. You know, people. You know, there's an old saying that 20 planes land safely today. That's not going to be the headline in the paper. If one crashes, it's going to be all over the place. You know, I see more good in the NBA than I ever see bad. I know of players that are doing things for youth groups. I know of players that are doing things for their communities. I know of referees that are doing things individually. We do things collectively. We're very active with the Jimmy V Cancer Research Foundation. I'm the national coach here for the Blow the Whistle on Cancer campaign. We're involved with the Wounded Warriors programs. So we have our own National Basketball Referee Foundation that provides charitable donations to groups around the country. And so I see a lot more good than I see bad. It's just that we've become a Jerry Springer kind of world where we all love to listen to the negative, and I tend to go the other way. I like to see the positive things that are going on and talk about those.
Okay. And before we wrap up, we're doing this interview a few days after the end of the 09 NBA Finals, as the Lakers beat the Magic. I understand from Dave that this is one of the first finals that you've had to sit out because of a torn Achilles. Was it?
Yeah, I have a tear in my right Achilles. I got injured the last week of the regular season, so I wasn't able to work in the playoffs this year, which was disappointing. As Dave said, this is the first time in 21 years that I'm not in the playoffs, and the first time in 9 years that I haven't been in the finals. But I'm working on it. I'm down at IMG Academies, Voluntary Sports Medicine, and getting my rehab every day. So I'm looking forward to the start of the new season in the fall.
Well, folks, I want to let you know that you can order Bob Delaney's book, Covert, at great bookstores everywhere, or online at mrmedia.com or amazon.com. The paperback is out this week, and there's actually an official launch for the paperback. Is this Friday, June 19th, at the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Mass. And if you've never been there, it's a very cool facility. You really, if you have any interest in basketball, you want to check that out. You can also learn more about Bob Delaney's consulting work at his website, www.delaneyconsultants.com. That's solid. And check out my good friend Dave Shiver's work at tampabay.com. Bob and Dave, thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today. It was a very interesting time.
Thanks. I appreciate it, and stay safe.
All right, you guys take care.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye-bye. All right, and folks, for more crime-related interviews, you can surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my earlier conversations with Donnie Brasco himself, Joe Pistone, as well as Tom Folsom, author of the Joey Gallo biography, The Crazy Ones, and many more. Please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote for Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites. Whether you listen on Blog Talk Radio, Pointer Online, MySpace, Facebook, Zanga, Friendster, Orkut, Bebo, Podcast Pickle, Vox, Folio, Mediafly, Podfeed.net, Blueberry, Zencat, Zimbio, or Odeo. And subscribe to Mr. Media in iTunes, and you'll never miss a show. Just search Mr. Media Interviews within the podcast section of iTunes and click the free subscribe button. It's that easy. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many locations. If you've got an idea for a guest, email me directly at bob@andelman.com. That's ANDELMAN. You can also follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, www.twitter.com/Andelman. Thanks so much for joining us today. Always appreciate when you give up a piece of your day to spend it with us. Thanks for listening.